Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. Even now, the memory clutches cold, my pulse hammering against ribs in the dead hours, trapped within the vastness of that ancestral house. I'd lie awake, eyes fixed on the shadowed geometry of the ceiling, deciphering the dialect of groaning timbers and settling foundations. My parents, lost to sleep down the hall, left me adrift in corridors that felt stretched by darkness, infinite. Generations of my blood had walked these floors, yet the house remained a stranger, perpetually unsettling. Each night offered its own subtle disturbance, some inexplicable signature left on the silence, a sibilance behind the plaster, perhaps, or a single resonant thud reverberating from the cellar's depths. My throat would constrict, my jaw lock against the fear. Reason whispered of wind, of aging pipes, but a deeper intuition insisted otherwise, a certainty cold and unwelcome. My youth unfolded within those walls, perched on the town's fringe. It was a cumbersome structure, 2 stories crowned by a forgotten attic. The front door, a slab of imposing timber, complained with every passage. Tall, narrow windows, relics of another era, invited slivers of frigid air that slithered like unseen things across the floorboards, despite my father's efforts with sealant and caulk. A phantom current always stirred the hallways. Near the entrance lay the living room, dominated by a sagging couch and a coffee table scarred with the history of use. The wallpaper, once perhaps cheerful, had surrendered to a jaundiced yellow, particularly near the ceiling's embrace. A solitary overhead fixture bled weak light, deepening the obscurity lurking in every corner. From there, a passage opened into the dining room, presided over by a hulking wooden table and a chandelier thick with dust, prone to a spectral sway when the wind rose outside. Beyond it, the kitchen sprawled, unexpectedly large, a museum of bygone culinary tools. Dented pans, cast iron pots, utensils hanging from open shelves above dark wood cabinets. Ceramic tiles clicked and echoed underfoot, amplifying every step. A rear door gave onto a meager yard, one skeletal tree, a gate consumed by rust, and beyond, only an expanse of untamed grass surrendering to the wild. My bedroom sat directly above this kitchen on the second floor, a resonant chamber transmitting every clatter, every slammed door from below. My bed faced the window. Under a full moon, the yard's stark silhouette would press against the glass. The remainder of the upper level was a labyrinth of corridors, punctuated by spare rooms and the floor's sole bathroom. Doors hung imperfectly in their frames, susceptible to drafts, sometimes discovered ajar in the morning light, though I had no memory of leaving them so. But the nocturnal sounds inflicted the deepest chill. Footfalls on the staircase, those ancient wooden treads that groaned under any weight. My parents' steps were familiar signatures, father's heavier, mother's quicker. Yet sometimes, swallowed by the late hours, a different cadence would ascend. The boards would creak with excruciating slowness, a deliberate, measured climb. Breath held captive in my chest. I'd wait for the ascent to cease. Often it wouldn't. It would begin at the base, mount halfway, pause as if listening, then resume. No door ever opened afterward. No cough, no human sound followed. Just the steps, then a profound, unnerving silence. And the whispers. They breathed within the walls themselves. Perhaps I'd be attempting to read in the living room, or lost in the television's glow when a faint susurrus would bleed into the quiet. Not words precisely, but a continuous, soft murmuring. Rising, I'd press my ear to the cool plaster. The sound remained elusive, indistinct, yet undeniably present, inhabiting the space just beyond the surface. Sometimes I'd rap my knuckles against the wall, a futile test for pipes which only amplified my unease. The contact sent a peculiar tingle across my scalp, a wave of static awareness. The cellar weighted down concrete steps behind the kitchen, its entrance guarded by a flimsy door beside the refrigerator, its lock a mere suggestion of security. One night, deep into the small hours, 2, perhaps 3 in the morning, a concussive thump erupted from below. I was at the kitchen sink, fetching water, when the sound fractured the stillness, seeming to vibrate up through the very tiles beneath my feet. My muscles seized, my hand clenched, frozen around the glass. I felt my heart battering my ribs, a frantic bird seeking escape. Retrieving a flashlight from the counter, I drifted towards the cellar door, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence at first, then faint but distinct, a shuffling, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the concrete floor. A primal urge warred with paralyzing fear. The desire to fling open the door, to pierce the darkness with the flashlight's beam, versus the absolute inability to command my limbs. Sweat slicked my palms, gooseflesh prickled my arms. Eventually, the sound subsided. I retreated, backing away from the door into the relative safety of the kitchen light. One of the most viscerally disturbing incidents involved the forks. I had risen near midnight, drawn by hunger. Flicking on the kitchen light, I saw it immediately. The silverware drawer slightly ajar, not wide open, but enough to reveal its contents, or lack thereof. Every single fork we owned lay scattered across the tiled floor, arranged in a deliberate, almost perfect circle. A jolt, cold and sharp, shot through me, my stomach twisted. I knew with chilling certainty that no one else was awake. I'd just passed my parents' room. Father's rhythmic snoring was unmistakable. Tentatively, I picked one up. It was just a fork. Yet the sight of them, displayed with such bizarre intention, induced a wave of nausea. I gathered them, trembling slightly, replacing them in the drawer, unable to banish the image. The conviction that some unseen hand had performed this strange ritual. I tried haltingly to convey these occurrences to my parents. Their response was a familiar refrain. Old houses settle, they creak, they groan. The wind, they reasoned, could catch a loose cabinet hinge. Perhaps, they suggested gently, I'd been dreaming, half asleep when I encountered the forks. But I knew the clarity of my senses, the stark reality of what I'd heard, what I'd seen. Most nights became a vigil, lying sweat-dampened in my bed, ears straining for those phantom footsteps, bracing for the next inexplicable intrusion into the silence. The day I turned 18 felt like an emancipation. I packed my existence into cardboard boxes and departed the following morning. No grand farewell to the house, just a quiet slipping away. I found a cramped apartment in the city, funded by savings from weekend jobs. It was small, imperfect, but blessedly silent in the ways that mattered. The only whispers belonged to the couple arguing upstairs. The only thumps were the radiator's predictable complaints. Normalcy. I could navigate normalcy. Yet the old house clung to me, a shadow stitched to my heels. Dreams became its new domain. I'd find myself navigating those familiar hallways, the floorboards sighing beneath my spectral feet, my own limbs leaden, immobile. Then wakefulness would crash in, heart racing, skin clammy with sweat. I'd stare at the anonymous ceiling of my city apartment, gulping air, the phantom echo of whispers still resonating in my ears. Minutes would pass before the frantic rhythm in my chest slowed, before coherent thought could resurface. I'd rise, drink water, pace the small space, touching the solid, blessedly ordinary walls. Months after my escape, I returned for dinner. My parents remained anchored to the place. Mother served a simple meal in the dining room, a tableau unchanged. The dusty chandelier, the faded wallpaper, the pervasive scent of age and stillness. Midway through the meal, a sound drifted from the staircase, unmistakable creaks. Mother's fork paused fractionally. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting instant before she resumed eating, a mask of normalcy firmly in place. Father looked worn, as though the house's slow decay mirrored his own surrender. He muttered something about its age, the endless cycle of repairs. I merely nodded. After dinner, lingering in the living room, I became acutely aware of every subtle noise. The couch springs protesting my weight, the wind's fingers rattling the window panes. When a faint, whisper-like sigh emanated from the wall, I forced myself to attribute it to the breeze. That night, I left earlier than intended, offering a flimsy excuse about early work. The truth was the familiar tension coiling in my spine, a warning I couldn't ignore. Sleep offered sporadic refuge. Sometimes I'd jolt awake, convinced I'd heard a thump from my own living room, only to find everything still and undisturbed upon investigation. I realized with mounting frustration that I was flinching at shadows, startled by the mundane. The refrigerator's hum became the cellar door's groan, the building's plumbing, the whispers in the walls. The memory of that house had become a phantom limb, an ache in a place that no longer existed for me physically. There were nights I'd sit huddled in bed, knees drawn to my chest, chanting silent reassurances. It can't reach me here. I'm miles away. At 20, compelled by some morbid curiosity, I drove past the house. I didn't stop, just parked across the street, observing. The front yard was surrendering to weeds. The exterior paint looked even more spectral, bleached by time and neglect. The windows seemed like vacant eyes, dark and unreflecting. Then I noticed it, an upstairs curtain pulled slightly aside as if framing a hidden observer. A cold fist clenched in my stomach. Was it my imagination? I couldn't discern a figure, only the unsettling suggestion of presence. Sweat beaded on my brow. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. After a few minutes, the suffocating pressure became unbearable. I drove away. The dreams persisted, sometimes escalating in intensity. I'd be walking the upstairs corridor, hearing a door creak open just behind me, spinning around, I'd confront only impenetrable darkness. Then the violent return to wakefulness, heart-pounding, shirt clinging damply. One night, the dream returned me to the kitchen, forcing me to gather the forks from the floor, one by one. In this iteration, they felt slick, viscous, and I sensed with terrifying certainty warm breath on the back of my neck. I woke gasping, fumbling for the light switch, banishing the shadows. Sleep did not reclaim me that night. Work became my shield. I sought extra shifts, stayed out late with friends, meticulously avoided the old neighborhood. But in moments of stillness, the memories would surface, unbidden. The cellar door looming in the periphery, the soft slide of the silverware drawer, opening on its own, the visceral clench of dread. A sense of foolishness sometimes washed over me, safe in my present, yet my body remained hostage to the past, reacting as if still trapped within those walls. Eventually, I spoke to my mother again. She conceded quietly that father too heard things in the deep night. Sometimes he'd rise, investigate, but always returned empty-handed. Moving had been discussed, she admitted, but the weight of family history, the generations bound to that plot of land, kept them tethered. I didn't argue. I understood the pull of legacy, even as every fiber of my being recoiled from the thought of ever residing there again. Over time, I attempted to forge a truce with the past. I constructed rationalizations. The noises were merely the groans of ancient wood, the whispers born of drafts whistling through wall cavities, the forks perhaps dislodged by a warped drawer track. I tried to overlay logic onto the illogical, yet beneath the surface of reason, doubt lingered. I remembered the distinct, chilling sensation of being watched as I knelt on the kitchen floor. I recalled the unnerving deliberation of those unseen footsteps on the stairs, footsteps that led nowhere, announced no one. The memory of that specific tension, that physical manifestation of fear in my own chest, refused to fade entirely. People occasionally inquire cautiously about the supernatural. Do I believe? My answer is always hedged. I can only recount my own experience within that house. I offer no embellishments, no grand theories. I simply state that I encountered phenomena there that defied explanation. Phenomena that frightened me in a profound physiological way. The trembling hands, the dry mouth, the mind racing against unanswerable questions. Even now, years removed, the dreams still find me. I wake, convinced for a fleeting second that I hear the distinct creak of a floorboard outside my door. Instinctively, I pad to my own kitchen, check the silverware drawer, a ritualistic confirmation that all is as it should be. The forks are always neatly contained. The kitchen remains empty, silent, still. Yet the relief is often temporary, unable to fully dispel the cold sweat on my brow, the knot tightening in my stomach. I take a deep breath, anchor myself to the present, the tangible reality of my own safe space, and return to bed. In the darkness, my thoughts inevitably drift back to those shadowed corridors, those sibilant whispers, those inexplicable steps. I force my focus onto the mundane, work deadlines, weekend plans. Eventually, sleep returns, carrying the silent hope that the house will remain absent from my dreams, at least for a while. The thought of confronting it has surfaced, a fleeting temptation. to spend one night within those walls again perhaps, to finally demystify the sounds, to prove their harmlessness. But each time the idea forms, the familiar constriction returns to my chest. I picture myself lying in that old bedroom, the drafts whispering through the hallways, and the overwhelming sensation of presence, of not being alone despite the visible emptiness. The decision is always the same: no. The potential cost, revisiting that specific suffocating fear, is too high. My parents remain. The house they maintain is too deeply woven into their identity to relinquish. I visit, confining my stays to the daylight hours. They don't press me to linger after sunset, a tacit understanding I appreciate. We share meals, converse in the living room, and then I depart. Walking towards my car, I feel the house at my back, a silent, watchful entity, raising the hairs on my neck. The last thing I ever want is to hear those stairs creak again while I am under its roof. To this day, clarity eludes me. I possess no explanation for the sum of those experiences. I only know they occurred, leaving an indelible mark. If I close my eyes, even now I can summon the sound. That slow, deliberate tread ascending the wooden steps. I can visualize the specific patch of wall where the whispers seem to concentrate. I can recall the musty chill of the cellar air, feel the cold shock of the kitchen tiles beneath my bare feet as I stared paralyzed at the circle of forks. What it all meant, I cannot say. I only know that the house and the sounds it held never truly released their grip. I fled at 18, and my visits are merely brief incursions into a past I refuse to re-inhabit. I respect my parents' choice, their rootedness, but my own path lies far from that place. It resides in my history, resurfaces in my dreams. And each morning I wake in my own bed, in my own quiet room, devoid of strange shadows and inexplicably open drawers. I feel a profound, fragile gratitude. It is, after all, the only peace I ever sought. A life where the night is simply a time for rest, not for listening. Yet the memories remain, persistent echoes in the quiet corners of my mind. They always will. Some nights etch themselves onto your memory, branded there whether you will it or not. This particular evening began with the mundane weight of exhaustion. I hadn't intended to recount its strangeness, but silence feels like a betrayal now. Weariness clung to me as I ascended the stairs to the study, each step a reluctant surrender to gravity. The corridor lights buzzed and stuttered, a minor annoyance I barely registered. A faint coffee stain, a ghost of the afternoon's rush, marred my shirt. I prayed silently against jocular remarks, my tolerance for banter worn thin. My ambitions were modest: settle in, peruse the latest materials, escape before the clock struck 12. Nothing more. That was the entirety of my intent as my hand closed on the doorknob, pushing inward to reveal the familiar tableau. The long table, the circle of faces. I was, as usual, the solitary man amidst the assembly. Happenstance, not design, dictated this arrangement. 7 women, perhaps 8, occupied the chairs this time. Notebooks lay open like patient wings. Pen lights cast focused beams. Phones rested nearby, primed to capture any flicker of the unusual. Our gatherings were typically cerebral affairs, delving into accounts of the uncanny, exchanging theories, scribbling notes. Spectacle was rare. Tonight, however, felt different. Someone, Lena, I think, though certainty eludes me, had introduced a peculiar artifact, a medallion. It rested on the scarred wood, juxtaposed against a book whose cover frayed like ancient lace. Crude symbols, gouged rather than carved, marred its surface. The metal possessed a bruised, tarnished gold hue, darkened at the rim. Chainless, it was simply a disc of battered metal, devoid of shine, yet radiating an unsettling aura that tightened my throat. I paused by my designated chair, letting my gaze linger. A dryness bloomed in my mouth. I raked a hand through my hair, releasing a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. We settled. Silence descended, broken only by the low thrum of the fluorescent tubes overhead. Someone extinguished the main lamp, igniting candles whose flames cast dancing shadows. This was our ritual, an attempt to court atmosphere when examining objects steeped in folklore or purported antiquity. I shed my jacket, draping it over the chair's spine. The air felt thick, stagnant. The warmth of the evening pressed in, unrelieved by an open window. Lena offered a brief provenance, a gift from an acquaintance, a collector of esoteric curiosities, possibly tied to forgotten rites. An invitation was extended. Handle it, sense it. Turn by turn, it passed from hand to hand. When my turn came, the metal shocked me with its coldness. A chill incongruous with the room's temperature. A faint tingling prickled my fingertips. Imagination, I told myself, passing it onward, striving for nonchalance. Discussion turned to the markings. One woman, referencing the tattered book, sought parallels, murmuring of runes, her words lost in the focused quiet. My gaze drifted. Candle flames writhed with unnatural vigor. A cool draft teased the back of my neck, though the windows remained stubbornly shut. The building's old bones settling, I reasoned, dismissing the absence of the air conditioner's usual drone. Restlessness stirred in my limbs. Around the table, pages rustled, fingers tapped silently on phone screens. Then a collective decision. Place the medallion centrally upon a square of dark cloth. No one proposed anything dramatic, no seance. Such theatrics were never our style. Yet an abrupt, profound quiet fell upon us, heavy and viscous. My eyes, unblinking, began to water. As I wiped them, I saw every face intent upon the medallion. A sound, faint as insect legs on parchment, scratched from within the walls. It vanished the instant my attention snagged upon it. Then a slow, groaning creak. Floorboards, perhaps, or the building's ancient plumbing sighing. My pulse quickened without cause. A film of sweat slicked my brow. My palms grew damp. Anxiety, I insisted internally, yet the palpable tension in the room mocked my self-assurance. Without preamble, a sharp, piercing agony lanced through my chest, centered near the sternum, like an icy talon finding purchase. A gasp tore from me. My left hand flew to the spot, fingers pressing against the sudden ache as I fought for breath. Heads turned. An inquiry floated. "Elias, are you all right?" A nod was my only reply, words choked by the pain that forced me to grip the table's edge. My vision swam. Darkness threatened at the periphery. The intensity ebbed, replaced by a persistent pressure, an internal weight pushing outward. It was then that the mist began, not rolling in, not sprayed from some hidden device, but coalescing, thickening the air around the table itself. A musty odor redolent of long-forgotten damp fabric stung my nostrils. Gasps echoed softly around me. Someone coughed. I tried to rise, but my legs felt like water. My hands pressed onto the tabletop for support, yet my arms trembled uncontrollably. From a shadowed corner, a deep, resonant rumble vibrated through the floorboards. I twisted my head, but the swirling vapor obscured everything. Candle flames leaped and bucked as if caught in a gale. Shadows writhed upon the walls like frantic dancers. The fine hairs on my arms prickled. My scalp tingled. Voices erupted, disembodied, genderless, speaking in a tongue utterly alien. Harsh syllables scraped the air, echoing, overlapping into a discordant chant. The pressure in my chest clamped down, stealing my breath. My jaw locked, saliva pooled, unswallowable. I strained to speak, to form a sound, but my tongue felt swollen, useless. A terrifying rigidity seized my limbs, locking me in place. My back arched involuntarily. Panic surged, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, throbbing in my temples. They saw my struggle. My name, spoken, sounded warped, distant. Hands grasped my shoulder, attempting to shake me, but my body remained anchored, half standing, leaning heavily on the table. My gaze, however, was fixed, drawn inexorably to the medallion. It had begun to emit a sickly greenish luminescence, pulsing in slow, deliberate waves that seemed to synchronize with the agonizing rhythm in my chest. A scream built within me, desperate for release, yet I remained mute, throat constricted, breath shallow. The chanting intensified, the unknown words rattling my skull, vibrating deep within my sternum. I felt it then, a presence, an alien volition, clawing its way up from my lungs, seeking egress through my mouth. I fought against it, a silent internal war. My shoulders shook violently. I managed to force my lips apart, emitting only a strangled, choking noise. A chair scraped backward as one woman retreated. Another, Maya, gripped my arm, her own hand trembling fiercely. The fog thickened, swirling around the central point of the table. Candle flames guttered wildly, casting the room in a dizzying strobe of light and shadow. The floor groaned beneath us. My knees threatened to give way, but the force inhabiting my chest held me upright, tilting my head back until I stared, unseeing, at the ceiling. Tears streamed, my eyes unable to blink against the strain. My skin felt cold, clammy, despite the room's heat. Shivers racked my frame. Fragmented instructions flew between the others. Open a window. The lights. Get the medallion. Footsteps hurried, frantic. A phone's flash momentarily pierced the gloom, uselessly. The overhead light switch clicked, but the room remained dim, lit only by the frantic candles and the medallion's baleful glow. The chanting reached a chaotic crescendo, words tumbling over each other into sheer noise. My ears rang, my pulse hammered relentlessly. A sharp, metallic taste flooded my mouth. My throat burned. My fingertips grew numb, my arms leaden. Maya tugged at me, trying to pull me away from the table's influence, but my feet seemed fused to the floorboards. My body jerked spastically, responding to the unseen puppeteer. My own consciousness felt trapped, squeezed between terror and bewildered confusion. Suddenly, Maya lunged forward. Snatching the medallion, she wrapped it hastily in its cloth, clutching the bundle to her chest. Instantly, the green glow dimmed. The chanting stuttered, faltered, then ceased, as if a switch had been thrown. The vice around my chest loosened fractionally. I sucked in a ragged breath, stumbling back a step. She turned, intending to carry the artifact toward the door, but a fresh wave of unseen energy surged through the room. The candle flame shrank to mere pinpricks of light. The fog seemed to contract, spiraling violently toward her. She cried out, tripping, collapsing to her knees, still desperately holding the cloth-wrapped object. The pressure returned to my chest, weaker now, but still present. I could move my arms again. Forcing my trembling legs to obey, I straightened. My vision remained spotted with bright after-images. My head throbbed. Others rushed to help Maya. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the bundle. I took a hesitant step forward, my own knees unsteady. Reaching down, I put an arm around her shoulders. Her eyes, wide with terror, met mine. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, damp hair clinging to her forehead. "Take it," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "Get it away." Hesitation warred with urgency. I recoiled inwardly from touching that thing again, but her raw fear was undeniable. I took the cloth bundle. A faint electric buzz resonated in my palm, traveling up my arm, a pale echo of the earlier force. I tightened the cloth, ensuring the metal was completely shrouded. Around me, faces were pale, slick with sweat. Breaths came in ragged gasps. The candles burned low, their flames now small and steady. The chanting was gone, replaced by a deep, residual hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The fog, though still present, began to thin, losing its unnatural density. Turning towards the door, I moved, each step leaden, my body aching as if from extreme exertion. Glancing back, I saw the others following closely. One reached the door, twisted the knob, pulled. It held fast. She pushed, rammed it with her shoulder, immovable. Holding the medallion close, I approached. The hum intensified, a low vibration rising through the soles of my feet. Dread passed between us in shared glances. No one spoke. I pressed the cloth bundle against my chest. The sharp pain flared again. Briefly, gritting my teeth, I held it there. Then, abruptly, inexplicably, the door flew inward of its own accord. The handle wrenched from the woman's grasp. It swung wide, admitting a current of cool, clean air from the hallway. The corridor lights shone steady and bright. In the room behind us, the overhead lamp flickered once, twice, then blazed to life, bathing the space in stark, unforgiving light. The last vestiges of fog dissipated into the corners. The candles still burned, placid now. The humming faded, dwindling to silence. We stumbled out into the relative safety of the corridor, hearts pounding, shirts clinging damply. My chest remained tight, but the acute pain had subsided. Adrenaline left my limbs trembling, voices overlapped, anxious questions, fragmented plans. Call someone, leave immediately, go back for belongings. I held the medallion, the memory of the chanting a dissonant echo in my skull. Moving further down the hall, away from the oppressive doorway, I placed the cloth bundle on a small metal utility chair. I drew a deep, shuddering breath. The others gathered nearby, a loose semicircle of shared shock. I rubbed my chest, trying to regulate my breathing. The hallway air felt blessedly cool, clean. My head still pounded, a dull ache behind my eyes. My arms tingled. No one knew what to do with the object. Lena approached it cautiously, asking if I was steady enough. I nodded, my voice emerging as a dry rasp when I tried to affirm I was shaken but unharmed. She touched the cloth gingerly, peering inside. The metal was inert again, dull, ordinary. Relief mingled with residual fear on the faces peering over her shoulder. A knot remained in my stomach. My hands fidgeted at my sides, unable to forget the sensation of violation, of something alien attempting to speak through my unwilling throat. A consensus formed: containment. Lena procured a plastic storage box from a nearby closet, lined it with more cloth, and carefully slid the shrouded medallion inside, snapping the lid shut. Sealing it away seemed to loosen the remaining tension in my muscles. Wiping sweat from my brow, I exhaled slowly. We ventured back into the room, now starkly illuminated, to retrieve bags and phones. The atmosphere felt scrubbed clean, mundane yet tainted by memory. The candles flickered innocuously. The air was still. My legs remained weak. I leaned against the table, exchanging uncertain glances with the others. How could we articulate what had transpired? We had all witnessed it, felt it, heard it, the voices, the fog, the palpable force, yet possessed no framework for understanding, let alone combating it. Escape felt like the only sane response. One by one, we filed out, descending the old staircase with deliberate care. Outside, the humid night air enveloped us. We lingered near the entrance, a small, shaken huddle drawing collective breaths. Streetlights cast pools of ordinary yellow light. Distant traffic hummed. My mind replayed the disembodied chanting. The ache in my chest persisted, a dull reminder. Exhaustion settled deep in my bones. Few words were exchanged beyond murmured assurances of well-being. No visible wounds, just the internal scars. Phone numbers were shared, a vague agreement made to reconvene, to decide the medallion's fate. Sliding into my car, I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, until the shaking in my hands subsided. The engine turned over. Deep breaths. Drive. I pulled away from the curb, resolutely not looking back at the building silhouetted against the night sky. That was the night something unseen had pushed against the boundaries of my own being, seeking to commandeer my voice, my body. My heart still hammers at the recollection, the phantom chill of the fog, the echo of those guttural voices. The medallion's true nature, its origins. These remain mysteries I am deeply reluctant to unravel. But the truth of the experience is undeniable, irreducible. A presence sought to use me, to bend me to its will. No embellishment is needed. That is simply what occurred within those walls. On that singular, terrifying night, every moment seared into my being. The silence was the point. Eliza had hunted it down, chased it to this splintered box of a cabin, nestled deep within the indifferent woods. A bare bulb, a cot, a wood stove, her kingdom of quietude, Spartan yet sufficient. Work's incessant hum, the digital tether, the chorus of humanity, all banished miles down a forgotten track. Her phone lay dormant, a brick of glass and metal, utterly useless by design. Here, only the woods were meant to speak. A week she'd bartered for, trading the city's grind for pine-scented air and the meditative crackle of flames. Days promised exertion on sun-dappled trails. Nights, the deep comfort of solitude under a canopy of stars. Wilderness wasn't alien territory. She'd known its contours since childhood, felt its rough embrace in countless camps and hikes. Yet this solo venture held a different resonance, a sharper edge of self-reliance. The inaugural night delivered on its promise. A profound, untroubled peace settled over her like fallen snow, a balm to a frayed spirit. But the second night fractured the calm. A concussion, dull, heavy, jolted Eliza from sleep's abyss near midnight. Not the cabin groaning in its sleep, nor the wind's familiar sigh through the eaves. This was impact, something substantial meeting the porch planks just outside. Heart vaulting against her ribs, breath held captive in her chest. She strained her ears against the profound dark that pressed against the thin walls. Silence answered, thick and absolute, amplifying the frantic pulse in her ears. An animal, she reasoned, grasping for the mundane, a fallen limb. Logic wrestled with a rising tide of instinct as she burrowed back beneath the quilt, pulling it tight to her chin. Slowly, reluctantly, her heartbeat began to subside. Sleep, however, remained elusive, hovering just beyond reach. Just as its soft edge began to blur her awareness, a whispery friction began. Scritch, scritch, faint, delicate almost, yet undeniably present, unnatural, outside, against the very wall her cot pressed against. A chill, independent of the night air, traced its way up her spine. She sat bolt upright, tension singing in every nerve. A glance at the bedside clock's cold numerals. 3:18 a.m. Bare feet met the frigid floorboards. She crept towards the single window, lifting the worn curtain a mere fraction. Moonlight, thin and watery, silvered the porch and the clearing beyond, etching the skeletal trees against the deeper gloom. Vacancy. Nothing stirred. Letting the fabric drop, she retreated a step, breath catching in her throat. What now? The dead phone, the miles of empty woods pressed in, tangible as walls, utterly severed. The scratching ceased. Stillness returned, heavy with implication, pregnant with menace. Then a new sound, delicate, insistent tapping against the window pane nearest the door. Slowly, mechanically, Eliza turned, her gaze fixed on the dark rectangle of glass. The darkness outside was impenetrable, a velvet void, yet a primal certainty prickled her skin. She was observed. Tap, tap, softly persistent, rhythmic, as if exploring the pane's fragility, testing its strength. She stumbled back, hands trembling uncontrollably, a silent scream lodged somewhere between her lungs and throat. Paralysis claimed her limbs. She felt pinned, exposed, prey, cornered in her flimsy shelter. The tapping halted as abruptly as it began. The ensuing quiet felt louder, more suffocating than the sound itself. She stood locked in place, scarcely breathing, listening to the void pulse around her. Minutes stretched into an eternity before she could command her legs to move, shuffling backward to the cot, eyes never leaving the accusing darkness of the window. Sleep was a lost country. She lay rigid beneath the blanket, staring into the oppressive black, every sense hyper-alert, waiting for the sounds to resume. Dawn arrived not with relief, but with the gray weight of exhaustion. Eliza emerged, stiff-limbed and gritty-eyed, into the pale morning light. She circled the cabin, scanning the dew-kissed ground, the empty porch planks. No footprint, no displaced object, no shred of evidence to corroborate the night's disturbances, as if it had all been conjured by a sleep-deprived, isolated mind. Isolation, she told herself sternly, forcing the thought. The woods play tricks on the solitary. Yet the conviction lingered, a cold spot on her soul. The feeling of unseen eyes, of something patiently waiting just beyond perception's fragile edge. She forced herself onto the trails that day, seeking the familiar rhythm of exertion, the sun's warmth, hoping to dispel the phantoms. But returning to the cabin at dusk, the unease hadn't dissipated. It had coiled tighter, a palpable presence lurking in the twilight air. She retreated to the cot early that evening, craving the oblivion of sleep. But sleep, once courted, now fled at her approach. As consciousness threatened to blur, the sound returned, that intimate, unnerving scratching against the outer wall. Upright in an instant, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, thoughts scattering like startled birds. A fierce reluctance warred with the terrifying need to know. She couldn't endure another night of passive terror, waiting in the dark. Trembling, she rose, crossed the floor, her hand unsteady on the door's simple lock. Turning the bolt felt monumental, a crossing of some unseen threshold. She eased the door open a sliver, peering into the moon-washed clearing. Stillness reigned, only the familiar shapes of trees under a cold, celestial gaze. Nothing, absolutely nothing. She secured the door, the click of the lock echoing too loudly in the charged silence, and retreated, pressing her back against the rough-hewn wall. Alone, miles from any soul, any help. She perched on the edge of the cot, every muscle corded, listening with an intensity that strained her ears, waiting for the next sound, poised for flight should it come. But only silence answered, stretching taut and menacing across the hours. Eventually defeated and raw-nerved, she crawled under the blanket, a vigil keeper in her own small prison, staring sightlessly into the darkness until the first hint of gray touched the window. With the first definitive light, Eliza moved. Swiftly, mechanically, she gathered her few belongings, stuffing them into her pack with numb fingers. No final survey of the cabin, no backward glance at the woods that had promised peace and delivered only creeping menace. She slid behind the wheel of her car, the engine's sudden roar, a welcome solid intrusion into the oppressive quiet. Hands clenched white on the steering wheel, gaze locked on the unwinding dirt track before her. She drove away from the stillness, away from the watching dark. What presence haunted that isolated patch of wilderness she couldn't fathom? Animal, human, or something else entirely, ancient and unseen. But its reality was now etched into her memory, a cold certainty beneath the fear. That cabin, that particular silence, she would never seek again. An act of charity, innocuous and small. I never conceived it could spiral into such abyssal dread. Yet on that night drenched in relentless rain, extending a hand to a solitary figure meant beckoning peril into the sanctuary of my car, into the fragile shell of my life. The wipers, twin metronomes of futility, sliced arcs across the deluge-streaked windscreen, their rhythmic squeak a counterpoint to the drumming cascade. Through the aqueous haze, I peered, knuckles pale mountains on the steering wheel. Midnight had long bled away, leaving the rural highway a desolate ribbon unfurling into blackness, punctuated only by the fleeting alien glare of passing lorry beams. Fatigue was a leaden cloak upon my shoulders. Hours of driving had followed a taxing day. The monotonous drone of the engine and the hypnotic percussion of rain conspiring to seal my eyelids shut. I contemplated refuge at the next service area when my headlights snagged him, a lone silhouette huddled against the roadside tempest, thumb starkly extended, a barely discernible plea in the gloom. Prudence screamed to accelerate, to leave the apparition swallowed by the rain-lashed night. Hitchhikers were specters of cautionary tales. Every soul knew the inherent risk, but a strange confluence of pity and exhaustion tugged at the wheel. Perhaps it was his posture, diminished and vulnerable against the elements. Or maybe it was simply my own spent state, craving any human presence to stave off the encroaching slumber. Whatever the catalyst, the car crunched onto the gravel shoulder, a sound loud as betrayal in the sodden quiet. He approached at a hurried shuffle, head bowed against the downpour. As his hand reached for the passenger door, the dashboard's faint luminescence momentarily illuminated his face. Young, perhaps mid-20s, shadowed by a rough beard, eyes wells of weariness. Obliged, he breathed, sliding onto the seat, bringing with him the cold scent of soaked fabric and stale cigarette smoke. Been stranded out here an age. No trouble, I murmured, easing the car back onto the empty asphalt ribbon. Destination? Just a little further on, he offered vaguely, fingers combing through dripping hair. Name's Silas. Elias, I returned, hazarding a sideways glance. Now, confined within the small space, doubt began its insidious crawl. An unsettling vibration emanated from him, a nervous energy that prickled my skin. We rode suspended in silence for several minutes, the engine's thrum and the relentless rain, the only occupants of the void. I was formulating a polite probe for a more precise location when his voice sliced through the quiet. Mind a small deviation? The tone was conversational, yet laced with a taut undercurrent. Need to collect something from a mate's place, not far off this route. Hesitation bloomed. The hour was late, my energy reserves depleted. An unscheduled detour was the last thing I desired, but Silas watched me, an unnerving intensity radiating from his gaze. Look, I don't know, I began slowly. Pretty beat. Was aiming for the next town, find a motel. Silas transformed. The veneer of weary gratitude fractured, revealing something adamantine and perilous beneath. That wasn't precisely a question, he stated, his voice sinking to a low, menacing pitch. A wave of frigid dread washed through me as his hand dipped inside his jacket. A sliver of reflected light, sharp and cold. The unmistakable gleam of a blade catching the dim instrument panel glow. Maintain your course, Silas commanded, the knife now resting loosely on his thigh, an unambiguous menace. And take the approaching right turn. My thoughts scrambled, a frantic cascade of disbelief and self-recrimination. How could I have been so monumentally foolish? Instinct had warned, yet I'd ignored it. Now I was ensnared, a captive hurtling through the darkness beside a madman in a speeding metal cage. I obeyed, wrenching the wheelwright, the tires protesting as we jolted onto a narrow, rutted track. The rain intensified, slamming against the glass in solid sheets, visibility shrinking to mere feet. Where exactly are we headed? I managed, striving for a semblance of calm. Silas disregarded the query. Pull in up ahead, he directed, gesturing towards a shadowed break in the tree line. As the car slowed to a halt, the headlights carved a dilapidated barn from the oppressive darkness, its timbers weathered to a spectral gray by countless storms. My heart plummeted. We were adrift in desolate nowhere, beyond any conceivable hope of intervention. "Out!" Silas ordered, the knife punctuating his command. I stepped out, instantly engulfed by the chilling downpour. He followed, the blade unwavering, guiding me towards the barn's gaping maw. The ancient door groaned in protest as he forced it inward. The interior exhaled darkness and the cloying scent of decay, shadows writhing in the faint light, filtering through skeletal gaps in the walls. Silas fumbled briefly before locating an old storm lantern, its feeble flame casting a jaundiced, unsteady glow upon the scene. "Sit," he commanded, indicating a decrepit chair marooned in a corner. As I sank onto its precarious frame, my mind raced, desperately seeking an escape route from this waking nightmare. Silas began to pace, a caged animal muttering fractured sentences. Something about pursuit, about needing to vanish. With dawning horror, I understood. He was likely a fugitive, running from something far more concrete than the storm. "Listen," I ventured, attempting to infuse my voice with reason. "Whatever trouble you're facing, perhaps I can assist. We could contact the authorities, clarify things." Silas spun towards me, his eyes alight with a feral glint. "Silence," he snarled. "You comprehend nothing. They're omnipresent, observing, anticipating. But I possess more cunning. They won't apprehend me." I fell mute, recognizing the futility of logic against his fractured reality. He was profoundly unstable, perhaps lost in delusion. Another strategy was required. While Silas resumed his agitated circuit, I subtly assessed the chair's integrity. It was ancient, the wood softened by rot. A fleeting distraction, a moment's lapse in his vigilance, might be all I needed to break free, to make a desperate bid for freedom. Hours bled into one another, each minute an eternity. Outside, the storm raged, wind shrieking through the barn's porous structure. Silas cycled between manic, paranoid diatribes and periods of charged, watchful silence. I remained hyper-alert, a coiled spring awaiting release. As the first faint suggestion of dawn painted the eastern gloom, my opportunity materialized. Silas had slumped against the far wall, vigilance finally succumbing to exhaustion, the knife held loosely in his slackened grip. With excruciating care, I rose, wincing as the chair joints uttered a faint complaint. 2 steps I managed before a floorboard beneath my foot groaned its betrayal. Silas's eyes snapped open, instantly feral and focused. A guttural roar erupted from him as he lunged. Pure instinct propelled me. I seized the lantern, hurling it directly at him. Glass shattered, spilling oil and flame onto the tinder-dry floorboards. Fire erupted with terrifying velocity. Silas screamed, a sound more of fury than agony, swatting at the flames greedily consuming his clothes. I didn't linger. I bolted, lungs searing with acrid smoke. The barn door, swollen and stubborn from the damp, resisted. I threw my shoulder against it, once, twice, a third time, before it yielded with a splintering shriek. I stumbled out into the pre-dawn chill, gasping ragged lungfuls of clean, rain-scrubbed air. Behind me, Silas's shouts warped into screams of genuine terror as the inferno claimed the barn. A flicker of hesitation, could I truly abandon him to that fate, was instantly extinguished by the primal imperative of self-preservation. I sprinted to the car, keys fumbling in my violently trembling hands, the ignition a near impossible target. As I tore away, gravel spitting from the tires. A final glance in the rearview mirror captured the barn fully engulfed. A roaring column of fire and smoke clawing at the lightning-riven sky. I drove for what felt like an epoch, putting relentless distance between myself and the nightmarish tableau. Only when the sun climbed high, bathing the world in ordinary light, did I finally pull into a bustling truck stop, my entire frame shuddering with exhaustion and delayed shock. Sitting there, staring blankly ahead, a voice from the radio snagged my attention. A news bulletin detailing a manhunt for an escaped convict, armed and classified as extremely dangerous. The description mirrored Silas with chilling precision. A wave of profound relief washed over me, immediately chased by a surge of nausea. I had teetered on the precipice of becoming another nameless victim, a footnote in a fugitive's desperate flight. The stark reality of my narrow escape struck with physical force. In the ensuing days, I wrestled with the obligation to contact the police. Ultimately, I chose silence. The barn was ash, Silas's fate uncertain but likely final. There was no tangible proof, only my fractured narrative against the cinders. But the ordeal carved indelible changes into my psyche. Caution became my constant companion, suspicion my default lens for viewing the world. The open road, once emblematic of freedom, now whispered of potential menace. And on rain-swept nights, when headlights illuminate a solitary figure by the roadside, thumb raised in supplication, I drive on without pause. The memory of Silas's wild eyes, the cold glint of his knife, serves as an enduring testament. Sometimes it is wiser to leave a stranger to the storm than to welcome unknown darkness across your threshold. That simple gesture of kindness, offered in weariness and misplaced empathy, had nearly exacted the ultimate price. It was a brutal lesson etched forever. The most profound threats often wear the mask of vulnerability, and the path to damnation can, indeed, be paved with the best of intentions. That particular morning clings sharp in my memory. The instant my neighbor burst from his apartment as if summoned to the world's most critical juncture. His door shuttered shut behind him, tucked fiercely under his arm, a compact leather portfolio. His shirt bore the abstract map of old paint stains. Streaks of dried pigment like forgotten rites marked his forearms. From my own threshold, I observed. No glance met mine, no parting word offered. He simply dissolved down the corridor, his footfalls a diminishing echo against the scuffed, weary tiles. After that moment, he was gone. I never laid eyes on him again. My name is Julian. Home is a modest fifth-floor unit in a building that groans its age on gusty nights. Power flickers out, water sometimes runs glacial, yet the rent is forgiving and familiarity breeds a certain tolerance. The neighbor, I'll call him Mr. Kalin, though the name never passed his lips in my hearing, had resided next door for roughly 8 months. A man of few words. Sometimes a brief nod acknowledged my presence in the hallway. Other times his gaze remained fixed on the floorboards, his passage swift. I'd long deduced his artistic inclinations, catching glimpses of canvases being maneuvered or brushes unwrapped near the communal mailboxes. An invitation inside, never extended, An inquiry from me? Never ventured. His affairs were his own, I reasoned, yet a filament of curiosity persisted. He moved with the air of someone perceiving a different stratum of reality. His attire, consistently adorned with the ghost of paint or charcoal dust, seemed less an oversight than a second skin he wore without concern. So, when he bolted that morning and failed to reappear, a subtle disquiet settled over me. A day, then two, I speculated about trips, perhaps an exhibition demanding his presence. But his absence stretched, and his door remained stubbornly unlocked. It gnawed at me, an inconsistency I couldn't easily dismiss. Several nights later, deep into the quiet hours, something caught my eye through his window. The building's architecture, a curious labyrinth, permits a sliver of view into his flat from my living room's side casement, provided his curtains are obliging. That night they hung partially drawn. I spotted it then, a large canvas dominating his living space, significantly grander than any I'd seen him transport before. It rested upon an easel, the painting visibly incomplete, yet steeped in somber hues. Squinting, I strained to decipher the forms. A shape emerged, something akin to a robed figure, perhaps hooded, silhouetted against a nocturnal sky. A strange tremor went through me, the distinct feeling of violating a deeply private space. The following morning found me lingering by his door, unlocked. I paused, my hand hovering near the knob, a hesitant satellite. My heart began a heavier cadence against my ribs. Just checking, I told myself, concerned. What if he'd met with misfortune? Injured, perhaps? Lost? I pushed the door inward. The faint, sharp tang of turpentine mingled with the earthier scent of oil paint. Silence reigned. The apartment was empty. It presented as ordinary, save for the transformation of the main room into a makeshift studio. Drop cloths lay scattered like fallen sails. Tubes of pigment, squeezed and weary, littered surfaces alongside soiled brushes. In a corner, a wooden stand held half-empty bottles of linseed oil and a pair of sketchbooks. And there, directly before me, stood the immense canvas glimpsed from my window. It depicted a nocturnal forest, dense and dark, with a solitary figure cloaked and hooded at its heart, positioned near a skeletal tree. The figure seemed to lean forward slightly, yet no face resided beneath the cowl, only shadow. The canvas edges remained raw, untouched. Details were lacking in the hands, the lower body dissolving into ambiguity. The background was a turbulent sea of deep blues and blacks. Brushstrokes lay thick, uneven, suggesting haste or intense pressure. Pigment on the nearby palette glistened, still wet. Brushes on a small table looked haphazardly discarded. Tentatively, I touched one. Its bristles were damp, yielding oil paint. Unease coiled within me. Why would Kalen abandon such a significant undertaking mid-stroke? The painting radiated importance, the potential cornerstone of his work. And yet, he was absent. My search for clues yielded little. The small kitchen held unwashed plates and cups upon the counter. The bathroom light was off, its contents undisturbed. His bedroom door stood ajar, revealing a Spartan scene. A bare mattress, a heap of clothes, a solitary lamp resting on the floorboards. Returning to the main room, I stood once more before the canvas. My pulse drummed, audible in the stillness. The hooded figure, despite its eyeless void, seemed to possess a gaze that followed me. I reached out, fingertips brushing the canvas corner. The paint was tacky, leaving a smudge of profound blue upon my skin. I retreated, pulling the door shut and engaging the interior lock. The action felt transgressive, yet the thought of someone else wandering in was worse. I pocketed the key from the inside mechanism, a small theft that felt necessary, promising myself I'd safeguard it for Kaylin's eventual return. That evening, a simple meal did little to settle me. An old action film flickered on the television, a futile attempt at distraction. My thoughts persistently drifted back, the painting, the hooded unknown within it. A constriction tightened in my chest. Overreaction, I chided myself. Yet around midnight, as I extinguished my lights and prepared for bed, a faint luminescence seeped through my living room window. I froze. The light emanated from Kaylin's apartment, a soft, contained glow like a single lamp bravely lit. Perhaps he'd returned, but the logic faltered. Why the secrecy? He had no cause to evade me. Peering through the window, the angle obscured much of his living room, granting only a partial view. But the easel was clearly visible, bathed in that soft light. My heart resumed its frantic rhythm. Then a faint sound reached me, reminiscent of bristles meeting canvas, that delicate rhythmic scrape of brush on wet paint. Sweat beaded on my brow. I whispered his name once, softly, knowing the glass rendered it unheard. A foolish gesture. I waited, listening. The sound persisted, patterned. A stroke, a pause. Stroke, pause. It continued for perhaps 2 minutes more. Then the light abruptly winked out. The next morning, I tried to dismiss it, imagination fueled by unease. Yet a compulsion grew. I had to see if the painting had altered. The key, heavy with guilt in my hand, granted me entry once more. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. Then I approached the easel, and a cold dread settled in my stomach. The figure in the painting had changed. The hood possessed greater definition. Subtle shading now hinted at contours where a face might lie, though still veiled in obscurity. The barren tree behind it sported additional branches extending unnaturally. I rubbed my eyes, disbelief warring with the evidence. The paint looked undeniably fresh. Bending closer, the potent aroma of linseed oil and raw pigments assaulted my senses. New streaks of color existed where, I swore, none had been the day prior. A frantic scan of the apartment revealed no footprints, no sign of intrusion. For several consecutive nights, the phenomenon repeated. The same spectral light, the same hushed strokes of the brush. It commenced at unpredictable hours, sometimes near 10, other times closer to 2. Each instance triggered a jolt of adrenaline, rooting me to the spot. My gut clenched. A cold perspiration slicked my skin. I'd stare out my window, a captive audience, until the light inevitably died. Sleep became fragmented, elusive. My eyes would snap open at the slightest creak from the old building. A persistent weakness inhabited my limbs, and my stomach churned whenever the painting surfaced in my thoughts. On the 5th night, I resolved to stay vigilant, determined to witness whoever or whatever was visiting Kaylin's apartment. I sat shrouded in darkness in my living room, gaze fixed on the window. Around midnight, the light in Kaylin's flat flickered to life. A faint silhouette materialized, moving near the easel. It possessed the vague shape of a tall figure bent over the canvas. Features remained indistinct, lost in shadow. Then came the familiar sound of the brush, steady now, deliberate as if applying meticulous strokes. My heart hammered against my ribs, my palms grew damp. A desperate urge to rush over warred with an immobilizing fear. My legs felt weighted, anchored to the floor. I could only watch, ensnared in my own terror. After several minutes, the silhouette paused. It seemed, unnervingly, to turn towards my window, though no face was discernible. I held my breath. The light extinguished. The figure vanished. The subsequent morning, I compelled myself to check. Reluctance warred with the need to know. The door remained locked from within. I turned the key, stepped inside. The painting had transformed yet again. The figure now possessed something resembling eyes. Two painted circles of a flat, reflective hue that seemed unnervingly bright under the apartment's overhead bulb. They acquired a disturbing quality of observation, appearing to track my movements. The cloak's folds were sharper, more defined. I ran a hesitant hand over the canvas surface. Certain areas felt distinctly wet. Standing there, trembling slightly, I tried to assemble the fractured pieces. No trace of Kalen. His clothes lay undisturbed in the bedroom. Nothing else within the apartment seemed altered. Only the canvas evolved. It was then the realization struck with full force. This wasn't mere discomfort, it was genuine fear. My chest felt banded, swallowing became difficult. I fled the apartment, locking it behind me once more. The day passed in a blur of unfocused anxiety. My thoughts circled relentlessly back. The canvas, the fresh paint, those nascent eyes. Seeking refuge in a nearby cafe, I stared into my coffee cup, the ceramic warmth a stark contrast to the chill inside me. The surrounding chatter and laughter felt distant, alien. I was adrift. That night, resolve hardened. I would document this. My phone, mounted on a small tripod near my window, became my silent witness, aimed squarely at Kalen's apartment. I waited in the encompassing dark. Around 1:00 a.m., the ritual began. The lamp, or its equivalent, ignited, illuminating the shadowy artist at work. I attempted to zoom, but the figure remained frustratingly indistinct, a blur against the faint light. My body tensed, every muscle taut. A slow, crawling sensation prickled the nape of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. For 10 minutes I observed, transfixed before the light died. I snatched up my phone, reviewing the footage with trembling hands. Darkness. A barely perceptible flicker of movement, like a digital ghost. The figure was too steeped in shadow. The camera couldn't grasp its form. Frustration curdled into a deeper dread. Multiple replays yielded nothing concrete. A surge of impulse urged me to confront whatever was in there right then. But fear, cold and absolute, held me fast. Sweat slicked my skin. My breath came in ragged gasps. The prospect of facing that entity alone was paralyzing. So I endured until sunrise. With the first pale light, key in hand, I returned next door. Standing before the painting, my stomach clenched into a tight knot. The hooded figure had attained an almost unnerving verisimilitude. I could discern the texture of the cloak's fabric. The eyes were sharper now, imbued with a faint glimmer that made them appear moist, alive. Subtle details had emerged on the hands, long fingers slightly curled. though still partially merging with the tenebrous background. The tree behind the figure boasted more branches, twisting at angles that felt fundamentally wrong, inducing a subtle nausea. A faint creak echoed from somewhere deeper within the apartment. I spun around, heart leaping. Emptiness greeted me. I touched the canvas again. Wet. My fingers came away stained with a dark pigment, black or perhaps a deep, bruised violet. Fresh brush marks marred the easel's wooden frame, evidence of recent activity. I stood rooted, the frantic pulse in my ears drowning out all else. Action was imperative. I couldn't allow this spectral artistry to continue. Snatching a sheet from the dusty couch, I flung it over the painting, shrouding the image. A momentary fragile sense of relief washed over me, as if concealing it might halt the process. Back in my own apartment, the quiet felt amplified. But that night, the light flared again, brighter this time, as if every bulb in Kalen's flat had been switched on. The sound accompanying it was louder too, not delicate strokes, but forceful, rapid impacts of brush against canvas. Through the window, I saw the sheet I'd placed lying crumpled on the floor. I paced my living room, a caged animal. Tension locked my shoulders, restlessness propelled my feet. Calling the authorities crossed my mind, but the words died before forming. There's a ghost painting next door? My missing neighbor's artwork is finishing itself? The absurdity was palpable. I sank onto my couch, hands clenched, waiting for the next development. When I finally risked another look, the light was extinguished. I remained awake until dawn, nerves frayed. Then, steeling myself, I went back. The painting, unveiled, now possessed the clear contours of a face beneath the hood. No distinct features, nose, mouth, were visible, yet the skin tones were there, shading across suggested cheekbones and a forehead. The eyes looked wide, fixed, as if arrested in a moment of profound terror. Their glossy finish snared the morning light with an unsettling sheen. My throat constricted. The thought of removing the painting surfaced, hiding it, destroying it. But the building's strict rules on disposal gave me pause. More potent, however, was the wave of visceral revulsion that washed over me at the mere idea of handling that canvas alone. My arms felt leaden, my head swam. By then, the sounds were no longer confined to the night. Faint noises began to intrude upon the daylight hours, the tap of a brush against wood, the quiet rustle of movement on the dropcloth. Each sound froze me mid-motion. My heart would slam against my ribs. I'd strain to listen, then force myself to investigate, only to find silence and solitude. Paranoia became my constant companion. I stopped attending work, offering flimsy excuses over the phone. My supervisor's irritation barely registered. I remained barricaded in my apartment, a prisoner keeping vigil over the adjacent cell. Sometimes the light would flash, momentary and teasing. Sometimes I'd catch a fleeting glimpse of that shape within, always near the easel. With each passing day, the painting accrued more detail. The hood now sported a fine silvered trim. The figure's hands achieved a chilling realism. The tree bark revealed intricate textures, and the background sprouted new elements. Distant, ambiguous lights like cold stars. I found myself drawn to stand before it, chest tight, breath shallow, mesmerized by its sinister evolution. My deepest fear now is its imminent completion. A creeping certainty tightens its grip. Once the final stroke is applied, something will emerge. either from the canvas itself or into the vacant space of the apartment. There's no poetry in this premonition, just a raw physical dread. My muscles tense reflexively at the thought. My mouth turns arid. A dull ache settles behind my eyes. I've been struggling to gather myself, to formulate a plan. One part of me screams to obliterate the painting, tear it from its frame. Another part recoils, terrified that destruction might unleash something worse. What if it's a container? My frantic mind whispers. What if I break the seal? Then sanity recoils. I sound unhinged. Yet every night the light returns. The brush whispers its secrets. The figure solidifies and I remain inert. I sit at my small kitchen table now, scribbling this onto a notepad because my hands tremble too much for typing, needing the anchor of pen on paper. Periodically, my gaze drifts to the living room window. Kaylin's apartment is dark for now, but the anticipation is a physical weight. My stomach is a Gordian knot. Sweat cools on my skin despite the chill in the room. If that painted figure acquires a complete face, I don't know what follows. I don't know if I can remain here. I no longer harbor any wish to see Kaylin again. All I desire is for the noises to cease, for the image to remain perpetually unfinished. Because if it doesn't, if it reaches its conclusion, a crawling terror insists that something far more dreadful is poised to take shape, and that is a prospect I cannot bear. So I wait. I wait to see if tonight culminates the spectral artwork, and I am utterly, profoundly terrified. I cannot tear my eyes from the window, and I cannot summon the strength to turn away. That first dawn I glimpsed the visages ablaze in the fire remains seared into memory. Solitude was my companion in a secluded canyon, an intended weekend refuge. I'd sought its familiar quietude, its vast emptiness before, but that particular night, normalcy fractured. Some unseen hand took hold and refused release. I reached the canyon floor as the afternoon bled towards evening. The pack a dead weight on aching shoulders after the long trek down. An unnerving stillness saturated the air, broken only by the faint cries of distant birds and the dry sigh of wind through parched scrub. Near a trickling stream, I chose my ground, relatively level, marked by a ring of stones, legacy of some prior fire worshipper. Gear deposited, the tent rose under my ministrations, a 30-minute ritual of poles and stakes, double-checked against nocturnal mischief. Twilight deepened, painting the sky in bruised hues as I scavenged for fuel. Fallen limbs near the camp felt slick with damp, driving me towards drier offerings sheltered beneath larger trees. My hands gathered grime and the sting of rough bark. Legs protested the constant stooping, yet I amassed a respectable pyre within the stone circle. From my pocket, a lighter. From the earth, brittle leaves coaxed into flame after several sputtering attempts. I nursed the nascent glow with gentle breaths until it eagerly licked the edges of twigs, crackling to life. Seated on a folded blanket, legs outstretched, I surrendered my gaze to the fire's hypnotic dance, its flames writhing in unpredictable patterns, spitting embers skyward. A fragile calm settled over me initially. Weariness from the day's exertion tugged at my eyelids, but I fought sleep, determined to steep myself in the profound silence. It was then, watching the heart of the blaze, that the strangeness began. Shapes materialized within the flames, yet these were no ordinary fleeting forms. They resembled faces, mouths contorted, opening and closing in silent mimicry of speech. Whispers, I imagined, though no distinct words reached me. Fatigue, I reasoned, a trick of tired eyes. Blinking, rubbing furiously, only brought them into sharper relief. I leaned closer. A frantic drummer took up residence in my chest, my mouth filled with the taste of rust and dust. The faces seemed agonized, their movements sluggish, unnatural, as if straining to articulate some profound agony. A soft, sibilant hissing threaded the air. The fine hairs on my nape prickled upright. Scrambling to my feet, I stepped back, trying to dispel the illusion, and then I heard it, a whisper, faint as breath beside my ear. I spun around, heart hammering, nothing, only the vast, indifferent dark. My breathing came in ragged bursts, shoulders drawn tight beneath my ears. I forced my gaze back to the fire pit. A log cracked loudly, a sharp report in the stillness. Flames surged and the faces reformed, clearer now. Distinct murmuring arose, not loud but rhythmic, possessing the cadence of a low chant. Sinking back onto the blanket, palms pressed hard against my thighs, a desperate need to comprehend gripped me. I leaned in again, the fire's heat a palpable pressure on my skin. The murmurs coalesced, fragments reaching me, trail, then ravine, and follow. A chaotic jumble, yet undeniably present. My chest constricted, breath catching, my heart pounded with a force that felt physical, threatening to batter its way free. A panicked scan of the perimeter revealed only the impenetrable darkness and the skeletal silhouettes of nearby bushes. No one. The voices emanated from the flames. I rose once more, retreating further. The instant my weight shifted backward, the flames leaped higher, tongues of fire stretching, grasping. A wave of intense heat washed over me, making my eyes stream. More words surfaced, something concerning an old path, a sudden drop into a deep fissure in the earth. I knew of a ravine nearby, a place I'd always skirted. A knot of icy panic tightened in my gut. My legs trembled, breath shallowing into quick, inadequate gasps. I resolved to walk away, turn my back on the inferno. I managed only a few paces before the fire erupted in brilliance, transforming from a simple campfire into a miniature furnace. Its light funneled outwards, a blinding passage of heat and glare. Instinctively, I threw up my arms, shielding my face. My eyes burned. The very air seemed to crackle. The whispering intensified, swelling into a chorus of voices, urgent, insistent, pushing me towards that unseen ravine. I remember standing frozen, fists clenched, torn between primal fear and a perverse, inexplicable compulsion to obey. My skin prickled with heat, sweat traced cold trails down my temples. The frantic pulse in my ears drowned out the night. Turning abruptly, I faced my tent, desperate to escape the luminous tunnel. As I moved, the flames subsided slightly, a cunning retraction, as if attempting to lure me back. I wouldn't be fooled. I scrambled into the tent, fumbling the zipper with violently trembling hands. Inside, enveloped in darkness, I listened to the frantic rhythm of my own breathing. Outside, the faint crackle persisted. The whispers were muffled now, indistinct yet undeniably there. I sat cross-legged, staring into the void, striving for calm. My chest remained tight, lungs aching. Slow, deliberate breaths gradually steadied me. Eventually, the fire outside waned, its glow against the tent fabric dimming to nothing. Exhaustion finally claimed me, though my mind churned with bewildered dread. I surrendered to my sleeping bag, praying the morning light would restore sanity. Sunrise found me stiff-necked, my back protesting the uneven ground. Unzipping the tent released the scent of damp ash into the cool morning air. The fire pit held only charcoal remnants and half-consumed sticks. The stone circle looked innocuous, the scene utterly mundane. The immense quiet of the canyon pressed in. Fatigue-induced hallucination, I tried to tell myself, clinging to rationality. But approaching the pit, a visceral chill snaked down my spine. The charred wood fragments seemed unnaturally contorted, scorched into shapes disturbingly reminiscent of those agonized faces. Rubbing my arms against the lingering dread, I packed with frantic haste, eager to put distance between myself and that spot. My palms felt clammy. My gaze darted nervously, scanning the trees, half expecting unseen eyes. Backpack slung, I started the ascent, each footfall echoing the pounding in my head. I encountered no one on the trail back. Home offered a semblance of sanctuary. Gear stowed away, a long hot shower sluiced away the trail grime, but not the unease. Muscles screamed their soreness, yet the familiar walls were a comfort. For several days, I actively suppressed the memory, immersing myself in routine. Work, mindless television, the pretense of normalcy. Then, one evening, a power outage plunged the house into darkness. I lit a candle. As the small flame wavered, casting dancing shadows, I heard it, a low murmur. I froze, mouth instantly dry, eyes locked on the tiny point of light. The whisper was faint, barely audible, but the cadence, the tone. It was the same voice from the canyon. I extinguished the candle with a snap, heart hammering against my ribs, choosing the dark. The risk was too great. My mind raced. Was I fracturing? Yet the certainty remained. I knew what I had heard. From that night forward, it became an inescapable truth. Striking a match, flicking a lighter, even glancing at a candle wick, each potential spark threatened to unleash the voices. Every time, without fail, the soft chanting returned, the same urgent fragments urging me towards unknown paths, hinting at gorges, hollows in the earth. The words remained scattered, disjointed, yet always insistent. An aversion bloomed into a phobia. I ceased cooking with the gas stove, resorting to cold meals or the electric hob. A flashlight became my constant companion. Matches and lighters were banished, but vigilance sometimes lapsed. One afternoon, a neighbor, Leo, enlisted my help with his backyard barbecue. I tried to refuse, but he waved away my protests. The moment the propane ignited with a whoosh, the low susurrus filled my ears. I recoiled, dropping the lighter as if burned. Leo's concerned query was met with a mumbled excuse about a singed finger. Heart pounding, I retreated from the grill's vicinity, the insidious chanting a faint echo in my awareness. Pretending to retrieve something from my car, I fled the yard, arms tingling, forehead damp despite the mild air. Claiming a sudden headache, I drove home, shaken. The ensuing weeks saw me descend into a state of heightened anxiety. Open flames became objects of dread. A smoker igniting a cigarette prompted an averted gaze. The candle aisle in the supermarket was territory to be skirted. Nightmares plagued my sleep, the fiery faces returning, their whispered commands pulling me inexorably towards that unseen ravine. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart thrashing, body rigid, breath shallow. A morbid curiosity gnawed. Was there something tangible in that canyon, some explanation? I contemplated returning, confronting the source, but the memory of the fire's terrifying sentience paralyzed me. The thought of deliberately inviting those voices, of potentially succumbing to their urging toward some hidden precipice, was unbearable. The tunnel of heat and light replayed behind my eyelids, the flames swelling in response to my retreat, the chilling sensation of being watched, perhaps even guided. Though I tried to bury the subject, the mystery festered. The voices spoke of old trails, clandestine rituals. Could local history hold a clue? At the town library, I pored over archaic trail guides and regional histories, searching for any mention of anomalies, unusual ravines, forgotten sites. The documents yielded only charted paths and mundane geography. Tentative inquiries with local hikers, seasoned explorers of the nearby wilderness, drew blank stares. The canyon was quiet, they said, occasionally gusty but unremarkable. Returning home from these excursions, I'd find myself sweating, face flushed, hands unsteady. Merely researching the area seemed to stir the whispers in my mind's ear. Tension coiled in my shoulders, making simple tasks difficult. I began obsessively checking locks, plagued by a formless fear that something might manifest, compel me to strike a light. My resolve was tested again when another neighbor, Marcus, needed help tending a small bonfire disposing of garden waste. Hesitantly, I approached the crackling blaze. My stomach clenched. My throat constricted, a high-pitched whine starting in my ears. As the fire popped and hissed, the faint whispers returned, insidious tendrils of sound weaving through the noise. Something about a hidden path by a waterfall concealed behind boulders. Weakness flooded my knees. I backed away hastily, stammering an apology, unable to explain the sudden wave of nausea. Marcus watched me retreat with puzzled eyes, but didn't push. I fled home, slamming the door, breath coming in ragged gasps, heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs. Sleep offered little respite. Night after night, an almost magnetic pull towards the canyon disturbed my rest. Sweat-soaked sheets, restless tossing. Waking thoughts fixated on driving out there, simply observing the campsite from a safe distance. But the memory of the fire's malevolent awareness, its beckoning power, always held me back. Fear of losing control, of being drawn in again, was absolute. One evening, frayed nerves snapped. A violent storm knocked out the power. My trusty flashlight, retrieved from its drawer, cast only a feeble beam. The batteries were dying. A search proved fruitless. I was out of spares. The only alternative illumination was a candle. I stood in the oppressive darkness of my living room, staring at the inert white cylinder, an internal war raging. Teeth clenched, neck muscles rigid. Finally yielding to necessity, I lit the wick. The instant the flame stabilized, the murmuring began. My jaw locked. A peculiar heat bloomed in my chest, my scalp tingling. I listened, paralyzed, as the whisper reiterated its cryptic instructions. Follow the trail, find the place where the earth falls away. I blew out the flame, plunging myself back into darkness, but the voice lingered, an echo in the silence. Sweat beaded on my temples. Impulsively, I grabbed my car keys, needing escape, needing air. The storm still raged, roads slick with rain. Gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, my breath hitched with every shadow. I kept glancing at the empty passenger seat, half convinced something spectral might coalesce there. Rain hammered the windshield, wipers struggling against the deluge. I drove without direction for nearly an hour, a frantic orbit around my own fear before returning home, nerves still raw. And so it remains. Ignition is forbidden. Watching others conjure flame tightens my chest with anticipatory dread. Every flicker, every spark threatens to unleash those same instructions. The voice is unchanging, eternally fixated on hidden paths, deep terrestrial wounds, and obscure rites I cannot comprehend. My nights are haunted vigils. My days are strung taut with vigilance. I have not returned to the canyon. I doubt I ever will. Something there wants me, calls to me, but facing it feels like surrender. Explaining this to a doctor, a therapist, feels futile. The inevitable diagnosis, stress, hallucination. But this transcends hallucination. I know the sound of that voice. I can summon it merely by closing my eyes, picturing a nascent flame. The memory is visceral. My body reacts as if I were still crouched by that malevolent fire, mesmerized by those tormented faces deciphering their fatal summons. There is no cessation, no ignoring it. I navigate life day by day, praying to avoid situations demanding fire. Sometimes I succeed. Other times necessity or accident forces an encounter. A match struck, a lighter flicked, and the whispers return, immediate and insistent. That single night in the canyon irrevocably altered my existence. Why the flames revealed those faces, why the whispers beckoned me towards that specific ravine, remains an agonizing enigma. I only know they do. I know I am tethered to it. It hovers constantly, a presence just beyond sight, waiting for the smallest spark to grant it voice. Describing it feels inadequate, stripping it of its power. It isn't metaphor or symbol. It is a tangible voice issuing from tangible fire, directing me toward a place I fear to tread. That is the unvarnished truth. It is here. It is real. I hear it. I feel its pull. And I suspect I will never again light a fire without hearing those whispers bloom in the heart of the flame. Six months have bled into the calendar since I first crossed the threshold of the Viridian Tower, an Art Deco monolith thrusting skyward from the city's core. That initial day remains etched. The lobby, a symphony of polished geometry, floors inlaid with intricate patterns, alabaster columns scored with severe, elegant lines. Voices murmured about the building's character, its undeniable presence, gesturing towards the gilded elevators with their wrought iron gates. Relics, they said, of a bygone 1930s grandeur. I offered nods, polite agreements, yet couldn't shake a peculiar density coalescing in my chest, a weight I couldn't parse as either nascent job anxiety or the tower's own pervasive atmosphere. I resolved to submerge it beneath the tide of routine. Within a fortnight, the rhythm of my role, untangling dense financial reports, established a pattern. I was frequently the last soul navigating the building's arteries. Deadlines loomed, anchoring me late, leaving me adrift in corridors that stretched into echoing voids under the buzzing fluorescent strips. Sometimes the silence wasn't empty but oppressive, the very walls seeming to inch closer. Fatigue, I reasoned, yet each solitary walk towards the elevator sent a crawl of static across my nerves. The elevator itself is an artifact. A folding lattice gate demands manual operation before one can enter the car. Inside, a burnished lever, though now electrically assisted, retains its archaic form on the control panel. A persistent miasma hangs within, machine oil, hot metal, overlaid with something stale, indefinable. Mold, decay. The scent clung, unwelcome. Illumination flickers from weak overhead bulbs, casting stuttering light across scratched steel panels and dark, worn floor tiles whenever the car ascends or descends. One evening, the clock nearing 9, I gathered my belongings and aimed for the lift. Corridor lights had already dimmed to their nocturnal state. Approaching the elevator bank, I halted. The gate to one car stood ajar. I distinctly recalled securing it upon my arrival that morning. A scan revealed emptiness. Only the reflection of a lone bulb gleamed on the polished floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. Drawing a steadying breath, I stepped inside, pulled the gate shut, and engaged the lobby button. A slight shudder accompanied the initial movement. The lights blinked once, then held. Descent was uneventful until the 5th floor. Abruptly, it stopped. The gate remained sealed. The car merely paused, suspended. I hadn't selected 5. I jabbed the lobby button again. The elevator remained stubbornly inert, humming its low mechanical tune. Seconds stretched, then, without preamble, it resumed its downward journey, bypassing the 5th floor entirely, delivering me straight to the lobby. I exited striving for composure, my hands betraying me with their dampness, my breath tight. Silas, the night guard, was engrossed at his desk. A quick wave served as my departure. A glitch, I told myself, just an old machine's hiccup. The following night found me captive again, this time until 10. Coat retrieved, office secured, my footsteps became solitary echoes in the deserted hallway. Reaching the elevator, a soft clank resonated from within the shaft, the sound of machinery in motion. I pressed the call button, the sound ceased. The car arrived, its gate sliding open onto vacancy. I entered, selected the lobby, waited. Silence reigned until the 6th floor. It stopped. Unbidden, the gate retracted, revealing a corridor plunged in darkness. No ambient light bled from under doorways. "Anyone there?" I whispered, the words swallowed by the void. No response. I stabbed the lobby button again. Nothing. My pulse throbbed violently in my neck. The gate hung open, the car motionless on the 6th floor. After an eternity measured in heartbeats, the gate slid closed of its own accord, and the descent recommenced. In the lobby, Silas offered a greeting. I managed only a curt nod before escaping into the night. My stomach churned. My throat felt scraped raw. Outside, the city's electric glow and a cool breeze offered a fragile anchor to normalcy. Stress, I insisted internally. Old elevators are temperamental. Sharing this felt unwise, risking colleagues' or superiors' judgment, inviting whispers of instability. 2 weeks drifted by. An urgent report kept me late again, around 8 in the evening. Stepping out for a soda from the machine at the hallway's terminus, I heard it. A distinct rattling near the elevator, the unmistakable sound of the gate being manipulated, Peering down the long corridor, I saw a figure, tall, draped in a dark suit, crowned with a hat. Frozen, I watched as the shape seemed to open the gate, step within, and the gate clattered shut. I moved closer, propelled by a morbid curiosity, but by the time I reached the elevator bank, the car was stationary on my floor. I summoned it. The gate opened onto emptiness. The overhead light pulsed erratically. A visceral chill traced my spine. Wiping a hand over my face, I forced calm, retrieved my soda, and retreated to my desk, delaying my departure until nearly 9:30, needing time to rebuild my courage. In the ensuing days, avoidance became strategy. Stairs became my preferred route outside the bustle of regular hours, but the elevator remained an occasional necessity. My 8th floor office made hauling archive boxes down to basement storage via the stairwell impractical. One evening, laden with files on a small trolley, I faced the inevitable. Dread coiled tight as I rolled the cart into the car and pressed the button for the basement. The elevator groaned its protest, the lights flickering with unusual intensity. By the time it reached the subterranean level, sweat beaded on my forehead. The basement was a realm of dim bulbs and long shadows, smelling of mildew and aged paint. A single corridor led to the storage room at its far end. Boxes unloaded, doors secured, I turned back. Approaching the elevator, a new sound emerged. Footsteps, it seemed, echoing from within the shaft itself, a metallic scrambling as if someone were climbing the iron framework. I stood utterly still, listening. The sound stopped. An overhead bulb flickered. I pulled the gate open. Vacancy greeted me. Stepping inside, I pressed 8, watched the gate mesh. The ascent began. Midway between the lobby and my floor, the car shuddered violently. My stomach plummeted. It slowed, hesitated, then continued its climb. My eyes were fixed on the floor indicator dial. It passed the ground level, kept rising. 4th floor. It stopped again. The gate slid open. The hallway beyond was dark, silent save for a faint whisper, less words than the texture of sound. Soft exhalations, indistinct murmurs close by. My skin prickled, my heart pounded a frantic rhythm. I jammed the button for 8 repeatedly. The gate closed. The car ascended. Emerging on my floor, I hurried to my office, locked the door, and sank into my chair, hands trembling, the ghostly whispers replaying in my mind. The next day, affecting nonchalance, I inquired with Mr. Henderson, the building manager, about potential mechanical issues with the elevator. He assured me everything was operating within normal parameters, conceding its age and occasional noisiness, but mentioning nothing of phantom stops or whispers. I didn't press further, just offered a tight nod and retreated. That evening, solitude reclaimed the office floor. The city glittered beyond the windows, a stark contrast to the lifeless, stuffy air within. I resolved to leave before true darkness settled. Bag packed, I walked the familiar path to the elevator. Forcing measured breaths, my palms slick, my shoulders tight knots. Reaching the landing, I swept a final glance down the empty corridor, the fluorescent lights humming their incessant drone. I pulled the gate open, stepped inside, pressed lobby. The car lurched, then began its descent. Smoothly, it passed 7, then 6. Relief began to bloom, fragilely. Then, on the 6th floor, it stopped, uncalled. The gate opened onto the dim hallway. No one. My breath hitched. I instinctively stepped forward, peering out, my foot just crossing the threshold. Instantly, the hallway lights extinguished with an audible click. My heart leaped. Scrambling back into the car, I hammered the lobby button. The gate began to close with agonizing slowness, as if fighting resistance before finally latching shut. The elevator descended one more floor and stopped again. 5th floor. This time, the corridor lights were on, empty, but from behind a closed office door nearby, a faint scraping sound reached me. I stayed put, jabbing the button, hands shaking. Finally, the car moved, delivering me to the lobby. I bolted out. Silas wasn't at his desk. I didn't wait, pushing through the heavy main doors onto the sidewalk, the cool air a shock against my heated skin. My knees felt unstable. I stood for a moment gasping, then turned back. The lobby was deserted. The guard presumably was in the back or restroom. The urge to confide vanished. Home was the only imperative. Weeks followed in this unnerving cadence. Sometimes the elevator behaved impeccably, making me question my sanity. Other times it stopped on random floors, haunted by inexplicable sounds. An attempt to record audio yielded only static, and on that particular night, the elevator performed flawlessly, as if aware, mocking my efforts. The building, it felt, was playing a game. Then came a Friday evening. An urgent client email required my presence until 7. Not excessively late, I felt a measure of security. Gathering my things, I headed for the lift. As I approached, the air grew suddenly cold. My arms prickled. I pressed the call button. The car arrived. Stepping inside, my gaze caught a reflection in the polished steel panel. Someone standing directly behind me, wearing a hat. I whirled around. Empty air. Heart pounding, I stood frozen as the gate began to close on its own. Lunging for the panel, I mashed the lobby button, praying for an uninterrupted descent. Past 7, 6, 5, the indicator dial spun reassuringly. Smooth passage. I allowed myself a shallow exhale. Perhaps this time. It jerked to a halt between the 3rd and 2nd floors. Lights flickered violently, then died. Utter darkness. The only sound was the frantic tempo of my own breathing. Fumbling for my phone, slick with sweat, chest constricted, I activated the flashlight. Its beam sliced through the void, illuminating the empty car, the closed gate. I slammed the emergency button. The motor whirred back to life. The lights flared on, and the elevator resumed its downward journey, stopping correctly at the lobby. The gate opened. I practically fell out. Silas stood by his desk, sipping coffee. I stammered something about the elevator getting stuck. He looked surprised, apologized for not noticing, promised to inform the manager. A nod was all I could manage before fleeing to my car, where I sat for long minutes, willing my breathing to steady, my shirt damp, heart still racing. The weekend offered no respite. The reflection, the hat, the suffocating darkness. They looped relentlessly in my mind. Quitting felt tempting, yet impractical. Monday morning, I approached Mr. Henderson again, probing gently about any unusual reports. He shook his head, asked if I was all right. I manufactured a smile, assured him I was fine, and retreated to my office, enveloped in unease. That evening I left precisely at 5, swallowed by the departing crowd. A fragile calm settled, only to be shattered by accumulating deadlines. Days later, 8 p.m. found me still at my desk. As I reached for my coat, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy shoes on marble, Assuming a colleague, I glanced out. No one. The pacing continued just beyond sight. My chest tightened. Escape felt urgent. Lights off, door locked, I navigated the corridor towards the elevator. Near my ear, a whisper, intimate as breath, shaping soundless words against my skin. I spun around, phone light cutting the air. Nothing. I quickened my pace. Reaching the elevator, the gate clanked open autonomously. Leaning forward, I saw the car waiting, poised, expectant. Stairs beckoned. 8 flights down, burdened by my heavy bag, legs weary, I succumbed. Stepping inside, I pressed lobby. The gate snapped shut with metallic finality. Silence held until the 7th floor. The car slowed, then inexplicably accelerated. 5th floor. Stop. The gate slid open onto darkness. The elevator's overhead light flickered, and in that strobe, I saw it. The distinct curve of a hat brim, just at the edge of the gate. A gasp escaped me as I stumbled backward. The gate slammed shut and the car continued its descent. Reaching the lobby felt like breaking the surface after near drowning. Relief washed over me. Out, a nod to Silas, then onto the pavement, legs trembling beneath me. Breathing the cool night air, I knew this was enough. A plan formed. Speak to my boss, rearrange my hours. These late nights were untenable. Safety lay in numbers, in leaving with the daylight tide. I tried to steady myself, gazing up at the Viridian Tower's facade. Its Art Deco elegance, once admired, now radiated only menace. My watch read 8:15 p.m. The street was sparsely populated. Passing headlights painted fleeting stripes of light on the sidewalk. No proof existed. No security footage captured a hatted phantom. No one else spoke of whispers or wayward elevators. Perhaps they hadn't seen. Perhaps they hadn't stayed late enough. Perhaps they simply didn't speak of it. I couldn't know. All I knew was the persistent feeling of being watched in that elevator when alone. The disembodied sounds, the gates opening onto empty floors, the fleeting glimpses of a figure forever elusive. Thoughts of quitting remain unrealized. Hope clings to the possibility of modernization, relocation. Until then, I avoid the late hours. If trapped, I linger, waiting for the reassuring presence of a co-worker before venturing into the hallway. It's an imperfect shield. This is my reality now. I work in an aging monument to a past era, serviced by an antique elevator with a life or afterlife of its own. It moves unbidden in the quiet hours. It pauses on floors no one summons. Sometimes I glimpse a hat, hear whispers that dissolve upon listening. No one corroborates my experience, yet I cannot dismiss it as mere fancy. It feels terrifyingly real. As long as this tower holds my employment, my guard remains raised. Each time I step into that cage, my breath catches, my heart drums a frantic beat against my ribs. I watch the gate, braced for it to slide open onto another vacant, waiting floor. And I try, desperately, not to imagine what I might finally see if it does.